Three main party leaders there. Well, every night I'll be joined by two guests to discuss the day's events. With me throughout the programme this evening will be Emily Ashton, the senior political correspondent at BuzzFeed, and The Guardian's political correspondent Raphael Behr. It's great to have you both in. Thanks for joining us. First of all, your reflections.
Yes, well, I mean, we saw these three leaders talk about the election starting gun well and truly fired. How many times have we heard that phrase? Finally, it is fired.
Yeah.
But David Cameron, you know, I feel like he kind of was able to speak with the most authority because obviously he's the Prime Minister.
The lectern helped, didn't it, outside Number 10?
Yeah, the lectern in Downing Street, the race to the palace in the car. Everything was kind of set up to be, look, I'm a man of authority, vote for me. I thought Ed Miliband's speech to choose to go in on business was an interesting one.
Yeah. Again, I suspect partly that was because he will be aware that he also needs to project some kind of equivalent authority, and he needs to reassure people, and we know from the polling he needs to reassure people about Labour's position on the economy. I thought it was very revealing, actually, that David Cameron chose with his comments to frame things almost immediately in very presidential terms. He came out and said, ultimately, this is a choice between who will walk through this door behind me, Number 10, will it be me, David Cameron, or Ed Miliband? It's very important for the Conservative campaign to sort of focus minds on who will be the Prime Minister rather than party, because the polling again shows that David Cameron outpolls his own party, and Ed Miliband is often perceived as a drag on the Labour Party. Yeah,
he sort of made it a sort of, a binary thing. It's him and Ed Miliband. But frankly, Emily, we know when we see the debate later this week, it's going to be a football field out there. Enough people on that podium.
But everybody's looking forward to Thursday night, aren't they? There's 7 leaders, this 7-way debate, when they're probably only get about 4 minutes each to speak.
Yeah, and again, I think David Cameron will be hoping from that there's a sort of he can project this sense that there's only one person among them who is obviously already the Prime Minister, who therefore looks prime ministerial, and he can say, well, look at all this sort of chaos and disagreement. This is the sort of hung Parliament party, all this sort of nonsense going on here, and I'm the sort of prime ministerial person. Obviously, Ed Miliband will be wanting to cut through a little bit, surprise people, and have people go, actually, I maybe misjudged that guy. Maybe he's actually a little bit more impressive than we gave him credit for, which is what the Labour people think happened in the debate last Thursday.
Indeed, indeed. All right, you guys are going to be around for the next few minutes or so stay with us. But there's no suggestion in the latest opinion polls that any party is heading for a working majority on May the 7th. All the signs point to a hung Parliament, though there have been a few conflicting signals about who might have been gathering momentum in the recent days. Here's Christian Fraser in the campaign hub with a look at the latest signals.
Yes, I want to focus on 2 polls that have been published in the past 48 hours. 2 conflicting polls, really, that sum up the logjam we currently see in UK politics. The first was published in the Sunday Times, one that probably had the Labour Party jumping for joy. They were 4 points ahead of the Conservatives in this Sunday poll. This is the margin of error, 3%. It's an internet poll of over 1,000 people, putting the Lib Dems on a lowly 8% and UKIP on 13%. But wait. The next day we get a different poll, this time from Comres, published in the Daily Mail, and suddenly the figures are the other way around. It's the Conservatives who are 4 points ahead of Labour, the Lib Dems up 1, UKIP down 1. Confused? Well, it is confusing, and the reason is because the battle is so close. What really matters, I think, is the general trend of all these polls, and that's what we put together in our poll of polls, crunching the numbers to give you this. The Conservatives and Labour locked together on 34%. This is the picture that goes all the way back to 2010, to the last election. And there's a few things to comment on, really, over the course of this Parliament. The first is this. This is how we picked up in 2010. So you see the Lib Dems squarely in the middle of the Conservatives and Labour and the minor parties, really the kingmaker. But then look how they're fortunes dwindle from over 20% down to 8%, and at the same time you get this rise of the UKIP all the way to about early 2015. Although it starts to dip here, we know that they're going to play quite a significant role when it comes to the election. I'm going to spin this forward just to the last 4 weeks, and you'll see the problem. Think of all the set-piece events that we've had in the past 4 weeks. The budget, the special programme on Thursday with Jeremy Paxman and Ed Miliband and David Cameron. But nothing they are saying is changing this picture. They are locked together on 34%. And people will be looking at this and saying, well, hang on, there's something missing. And you'd be right. There is a yellow line missing, and that is the line that belongs to the SNP. The reason is because this is a poll of parties that are standing in Great Britain. It doesn't factor in the party that is standing in Scotland and will make such a difference. Let me show you for a second. A poll that was done by ICM on the 23rd of March, and look at that. The SNP 16 points ahead of Labour, a long way ahead of the Conservatives. Now, on these polling figures, there are predictions that they would take as many as 47 seats, becoming the third biggest party in Parliament. And incidentally, these are the kind of figures that David Cameron and Ed Miliband can only dream of. They're locked at 34%, nowhere near the 43% of the SNP.
Christian Fraser there, Emily and Raphael are still with me. The SNP, that seems to be, Raphael, the only vote so far that's holding up anywhere. The vote seems to be pretty soft for all the other parties. The SNP are doing incredibly well.
Absolutely. I mean, you now are looking at a situation where almost certainly the outcome of the election, that question of who becomes Prime Minister, will be substantially decided in Scotland, because throughout this Parliament we've seen that roughly a third of people seem to vote Conservative almost regardless of what happens. They're just Tory voters, and it's stuck like that. Labour hovering around, as you saw, a similar sort of area, and then out of nowhere the SNP have come in, and they take those seats mostly from Labour. So seats that go to the SNP, it doesn't help the Tories get sort of closer to a majority. Sure as damn it makes it harder for Labour, and so you could have a situation where after the Conservatives have thrown multiple kitchen sinks at Ed Miliband and at the Labour Party, the thing that's actually helping David Cameron most now is Scottish nationalism and the vote in Scotland, which is fuelled largely by people who also hate the Tories. So it's a very peculiar dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, all that talk about, Emily, from the Conservatives about, Alex Salmond having Ed Miliband in his pocket and, you're going to be dancing to the SNP's tune, that has got to resonate for the Conservatives, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think they really think that it's making an impression with voters in England who are really wary of the SNP holding power in a coalition and telling people in England what to do effectively. They think it's not very fair that the SNP have this say in Great Britain. And now Ed Miliband has had to rule out that formal coalition, but he has not ruled out a confidence and supply arrangement where the SNP would help Labour in power.
Absolutely not. And the interesting thing is the reason that Ed Miliband will not entirely rule out any kind of collaboration with the SNP is even if the Conservatives finish slightly ahead in share of the vote and the seats, there are potentially more routes for Ed Miliband to become Prime Minister if he can be supported by the SNP, and if there's, say, 30 Liberal Democrat seats and they can be brought on board somehow. Actually, David Cameron's options, if he's shy of a majority, much more limited. So it's very important for him to sort of delegitimise the idea of Ed Miliband ever being Prime Minister if it relies on the Scottish nationalists.
Sure. Emily, UKIP, where are they? What's going on with them?
Yeah, they seem to have had a dip in recent weeks, although I was out with them today. Nigel Farage launched his pledge card and got mobbed by journalists. Yeah, they seem to have been quite quiet, didn't they, over the recent weeks? I think they're planning to make a bit of a bigger splash again. As I say, I mean, Nigel Farage today was absolutely loving the attention, I must say. And they really do hope to get a fair number of seats, but I think they realise that, to get more than a handful is going to be pretty good going for them. But
is there a sense that, the by-election wins and so on that they've had have been the result of a protest vote?
Yeah.
And now that we come to the main gig, as it were, the votes are beginning to settle back into their normal sort of rhythm.
You certainly get a sense of that, and that's absolutely what the Conservatives are relying on, because routinely throughout this Parliament, one of the reasons the Conservative vote has looked depressed is because quite a lot of people have obviously gone over to UKIP, and what sort of Downing Street, what the sort of strategists will say is, actually, when it comes down to it, a lot of those UKIP voters will blink. They will realise that what you're choosing here is a Prime Minister, the future of the country, and even if a little bit reluctantly with a clothes peg on their nose, they'll come sort of home to the Tories. But they've been saying that for a long time, and it will happen a little bit, but it might not happen enough to actually give the Tories the boost that they need.
Sure. OK. We'll be back with you too.